And with that, we're going to get right started with our program. We're going to start off with surface and mineral owner topics. And we're going to hear about well-plaid reclamation and talk a little bit about with the state and amongst other stakeholders, including surface owners and industry, about reclamation requirements. Is there any need or interest in changing the way things are done, or are they flexible enough as is? And so with that, I'm going to turn this over to Rich Grubbs. He is the Chevron's Mid-Continent Business Unit Manager for Water and Waste. Is that right?
Water and Waste Advisor. Yeah.
Water and Waste Advisor. So with that, I'll turn that over, and then shortly after that, we're going to hear from Chantel Taylor. She's going to talk about potential ballot initiatives and pending legislation, and then we'll also hear from Neil Ray from the Colorado National Association of Royalty Owners. So I'll turn that over, and we'll start off with the well-pad reclamation topics.
Good morning, everyone. How are you this morning? We have a panel of 4 folks that are going to talk about reclamation as it relates to both our regulatory activities as well as landowner activities and operator perspectives. So it's an issue that we all face no matter what phase of activity we're in. I'm going to introduce our panel guests, and they can come on up. We have Sam Potter, who represents an owner's perspective. We enjoyed a good portion of Sam's area of interest last night, I believe, at our steak fry. And then we have Margaret Ash from the regulatory standpoint, COGCC, if you want to come on up. She's a field specialist and oversees field work. Then we have Michael Gartner with WPX Energy, and Lorne Prescott with Laramie Energy that will be providing input and commentary on this topic. We're going to go for about 7 minutes for each person to make an introduction to the topic and their perspective view, and then we'll circle back for questions following that. Again, it's an issue that we all face no matter where we are in our activities. Either we're nearing the end of a season of life of a well, and we're having to move that lease from active lease into a reclaimed lease, or we're just getting started with clearing and grubbing of land for a new project, and we're having to manage the expectations of the future of that. So with that in mind, I'm going to start us off with a little quote from one of my personal heroes. As a moderator, I get to do this. So one of my personal heroes is Teddy Roosevelt, and he said in a speech, he said, conservation and rural life or rural land management policies are really 2 sides of the same policy, and down at the bottom of the policy rests upon the fundamental law that neither man nor nation can prosper unless, in dealing with the present, thought is steadily given to the future. So that's what we're doing as we look at reclamation. We're trying to do and live in the here and now, but then we're also trying to address what the future should look like. So with that, I'm going to let Sam come up and start us off. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you. Good morning. My comments are going to be brief and general because I thought that this would primarily be an interactive type of panel discussion. I find that those kinds of activities are sometimes more productive than folks just listening to me blow hot air about things. But I'd like to preface my comments by thanking Garfield County for this opportunity, along with Colorado Mesa University and our host facility, Grand River Hospital District, which I served on the board here for many years, and Commissioner Sampson was nice to point out that we do have a nice convention facility here, something that was badly needed in our area for a number of years, and I don't mind telling you that it would not be here were it not for the gas industry in western Garfield County and the surrounding area. Played a big part in having the people and the funds available to construct this place. I'd also like to give a tip of my hat to Mr. Kirby Wynn, the organizer of this event. Kirby and I go back a few years. I'm also president of the West Divide Water Conservancy District, and worked with Kirby when he was with the USGS. We were always concerned about water quality and the impact of drilling in the area, and Kirby helped us at the USGS. The West Divide was the lead agency, and we put together a water repository, data repository for all of the wells, or all that we could get our hands on in the Piceance Basin when we were having so much activity going on here. And it was a great tool, not only for the general public, but for the operators. I tried to convince the operators it was a good insurance policy. All this was kicked off about the time that we were dealing with Divide Creek Seep when I was on the commission. And so we were very sensitive to those issues. I might add that a DOLA grant was what helped us get that project off the ground. So everywhere you look in this part of the world, of course, we've been touched these days by oil and gas, and very much so for surface owners and ranchers and farmers in the area. Farmers and ranchers are a unique breed in that they find ways to use and reuse and best use the lands that they have to operate on. And it's for that reason that sometimes a set of rules doesn't always apply to every circumstance. Currently, one of the well pads that we have on our properties at Rulison, we've been having an issue with getting a variance with regard to the reclamation on the pad and making the state of Colorado happy with the current state of its reclamation. The area before the pad was constructed, we had used the area as a staging area anyway for some of our building materials and that kind of thing. So when the pad came on later, it seemed only natural, since we had a better road to it and so forth, to store equipment and so forth on the edge of the pad. But part of it was still within the scope of the COGCC's regulatory authority. So we're looking for a way that is less cumbersome to deal with the state. And I think somewhere in some of this information that said, you know, one size does not fit all, and that certainly is the case. We have to be flexible in these situations. And if you're in my shoes, I think that the landowner best knows how to use his property effectively. You search long and hard when you place a pad in our part of the world to make it as less intrusive to your operations as possible. And for that reason, there are some marginal properties probably involved as far as production is concerned anyway. So to put it back into production may mean returning it to, as I said, a staging site or some other kind of activity that doesn't normally, not normally be reclaimed like a piece of ground out in the hayfield in Weld County. So with that said, I guess we'll be open for questions later.
So Sam, thank you for that. Margaret, would you come up and present a viewport from the regulatory standpoint on the topic?
Okay.
Oh, yes, he's going to deal with
it. Good morning. My name's Margaret Ash. I'm the Field Inspection Manager with the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. And I, again, like Mr. Potter, I want to thank Garfield County and Colorado Mesa State for putting on this really interesting energy and environment symposium. And to Kirby Wynn and others that brought reclamation as a major agenda topic. It's a topical topic. It's very much in the news right now, but it generally doesn't, it's generally not as interesting as 5 or 6 economists talking about billions of dollars and things. But glad that it's part of the agenda today. And I've just got a couple of brief slides. Essentially, there were 2 questions that were asked. Are our rules flexible, or are they one size fits all? And then what can a surface owner do if they don't want their land reclaimed? So I think our rules are extremely flexible. They're designed to fit on cropland, grazing land, rangeland, pasture land. And they're essentially guidelines and performance standards for conducting reclamation, for having successful reclamation. And they're not prescriptive, but there are ideas of what will help you reclaim your site. And it starts with construction, salvaging topsoil. And a lot of people think, well, maybe in the mountains there isn't a lot of topsoil. But most areas, even rocky areas, have a little bit of topsoil, so it's worth salvaging. And if you do it right and you salvage it and reuse it later, it can really, really help your final reclamation. So these are just sort of performance standards, things that if you do them, that'll help your reclamation. Again, revegetation, some people look at our revegetation standard and it says 80% coverage, uniform coverage. That seems a little extreme, but it's 80% of what was pre-existing or a reference area nearby. We're not asking for people to create golf courses and turf and things like that. We are starting to emphasize native species. The seed mix for reseeding is the first. The surface owner gets to pick the seed mix, and if the surface owner doesn't have one that they want to use, then the rules say talk to the local conservation district. But I know our people are starting to push, our reclamation people are starting to try to get people interested in native species because they're more drought tolerant. And we have some rules about things like decompaction. Again, something that it can be overlooked, but it's very important. It can really limit plant growth. Weed management, we talk about weed management in several different parts of our rules, but again, we don't prescribe how it has to happen. There's different ways. An oil and gas operator in the San Juan Basin actually used goats on a project, and they had a pretty successful reclamation. The second question was really, what do we do? What can a surface owner not have their land reclaimed, a well pad? And there is a process for it, and I understand that it's not as simple and easy as that some people would like, but this is just an example of a ranch in Huerfano County. They had about 30 well pads, and when they closed out this field, they plugged the entire field. The ranch, the surface owner and the oil and gas operator just sat down with some maps, and they said, well, there's some lease roads we want to keep. There's some pads, about 17 of the pads that they wanted slightly recontoured, but not completely. They wanted it flat. It was going to help with their cattle feeding operation. And then they had some production pits that they wanted slightly reclaimed, so they made like little swales out of them to capture water. So it can happen. There is a process for it. Here's another example. These were production ponds that were turned into trout. People raise little trout hatchlings, fingerlings. I don't know. I'm not a wildlife biologist. But this is in Archuleta County. So there are ways to do it. But it's complex, and some of that is because of our mission. The Colorado Oil and Gas, we have a complex dual mission. We're responsible for protecting public health, safety, welfare, and the environment, and in wildlife resources, along with promoting balanced development of the resources. But it's this public health, safety, welfare thing that is really kind of complicated. So some surface owners might be happy with areas not being reclaimed, but is that for the public good? Is there a public welfare issue? So even though people would want these things to happen quickly, it's not something that is easily streamlined in our rules, because weeds don't really know a boundary unless they tumble up against a fence, and dust and things like that, erosion, sediment, dust, they also don't know boundaries. So we do have a process. We have a rule 1001C, and that's a surface owner waiver. If they don't want the area reclaimed per our performance standards, you can request that it not be reclaimed. And again, it's complex. Things weren't happening as fast as or efficiently as they should have, so we put together this guidance document. This is the title, and it outlines steps and information for the operators, the oil and gas operators, to give to staff so we can do the review and analysis. And then it outlines a series of procedures for the Oil and Gas Commission staff to keep us, moving forward and try to be as efficient as possible. And so that's my, basic presentation. I think our rules are flexible. We're trying to become more efficient on these surface owner waivers, but it is slightly complex and maybe not as simple as some people would like it to be.
Thank you, Margaret. So Michael, would you come and present a viewport from the WPX experiences? Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Good morning, everybody. My name is Mike Gartner. I'm the EH&S manager for WPX Energy. And every time I participate in one of these, it's always interesting that, a lot of times we're really saying the same thing. We're just looking at the same issue or the same challenge slightly differently. But I do appreciate this opportunity to be with you guys and to discuss this issue of well pad reclamation. And it is an issue and a challenge that a lot of us have wrestled with in this room over the years. But and actually, first off, what I'd like to do is just give a quick disclaimer. That's why all the red asterisks. This is my perspective only. I don't portend to represent opinions of other industry, but based on my experiences, this is I'll give you a few notes, a few ideas about how would we answer this question. Should well pad reclamation requirements, are they one size fits all or flexible? And a lot of this stuff, I'm going to echo the same sentiments as Mr. Potter and Margaret. And my perspective on this is that a one size fits all approach is problematic. Final reclamation requirements should be flexible, and whenever possible, we do need to accommodate the needs and requests of the landowners. It is, as you know, it's a very integrated and as Margaret alluded to, perhaps a somewhat complex interaction between the landowners, COGCC, and the operator. But my rationale for why I think it needs to be a flexible approach is, basically these are private property rights, what we're talking about here. Owners should have access and use, and I would qualify that by saying a limited use to certain portions of those permitted locations that are no longer active, and they're not non-essential areas of the pad. Many of the owners, as Mr. Potter and Mr. Jolly and many in the room will attest, that there are legitimate needs to make full use of usable surface on the properties, especially when we live in the challenging terrain and the mountainous areas here in the Piceance. A good flat piece of ground, no matter what size, is valuable, and it does have value. So. And denying access or making it difficult for landowners to use that, I think it is setting the stage for conflict between the landowners, the agencies, and the operator. We're kind of getting caught between the dog and the fire hydrant on that, because it's not a comfortable position to be in. The other part about as I mentioned, usable land surfaces, these are limited quantities out here in this area. And consolidation and centralization of these disturbances, there are benefits and advantages to doing that. It minimizes, if they can take advantage of areas that are already disturbed, it minimizes other areas that may have to be disturbed elsewhere. And in consolidating these disturbances, there are definite advantages to maintaining the integrity of wildlife habitat, and it also, fewer disturbances is fewer visual impacts. And I think, just especially with the steak fry we had last night, looking out across the vistas and the valley, that's of high value to all of us, is to preserve those visual impacts out here. And lastly, just for why I feel this should be a flexible approach, is just basic economics and common sense. It is wasteful. It's a waste of resources to reclaim a location and ignore, if we have a good idea of what long-term uses the landowner may have in mind, to ignore those, to go ahead and reclaim it, only to have it potentially redisturbed at a later date. It's just wasteful. But having said all that, I think this is a two-way street. This isn't a blank check. I don't think it can be. Activities in these areas, they cannot interfere with ongoing oil and gas operations that are occurring at the site, especially if they, any potential use would present any additional safety issues. And I know some of the problems we've encountered in the past, or concerns, if you will, is restricting emergency response vehicles and ability to get emergency response equipment on the site if needed. And also, any other, if we're introducing any other potential ignition sources, if area portions of the pad are being used, we have to absolutely make sure that we are maintaining the same distances that would be required to cause any concern from an ignition standpoint. And then, of course, kind of going hand in hand with that is if it would potentially result, if that use would result in any unacceptable or adverse impact to the environment. Storage of any hazardous materials, chemicals, wastes, without the proper BMPs and containment and controls, that's just not good business. And again, we all work and live here within some pretty sensitive areas within Garfield County, where 317B areas, water quality is of utmost importance. And so if we do anything that would present a risk to that cannot be allowed. Okay. So, like I said, this is a two-way street. Surface owners, they must also accept responsibility and liability for their activities, and recognize that you know, these areas that they may be targeting for use, they are still in close proximity to permitted oil and gas facilities. And as such, you know, they have to be maintained and kept in good condition with respect to, you know, weed control, stormwater management, access, security, and so forth. So going forward, I'll wrap this up here real quick, Richard. I think there's several things that all of us can probably do better and keep in mind some suggestions. Operators, we need to better assess the landowner's long-term plans for the affected areas, clearly identify the requests during the permitting and the planning process, and make sure that we have those discussions with COGCC before development occurs. On the landowner side, it's integral that they communicate their interim and perhaps long-term uses and get those plans clearly identified up front. And be cognizant that safety and environmental concerns, they're integral to having that well pad on their property. And you know, I think one of the key things here, and Margaret mentioned it, be cognizant of the COGCC's mission. They are charged with the safe and responsible development of resources, and that just comes with the territory and doing work on these locations. As far as COGCC, you know, some suggestions. Make the process perhaps less burdensome on the operators. Kind of streamline that process, I think would be very helpful. And, you know, be flexible. You know, understand that, you know, the west slope is different from the front range. We have very different climatic conditions, soil types, topography, and you know, we can't paint the whole state with the same brush. So one size does not fit all. Lastly, you know, again, just to summarize, I think these requests should be accommodated when they don't interfere with safe operations of oil site. They don't result in a safety hazard, and they don't present a risk to the environment. I think this is something that we can work together on. I don't think these are insurmountable issues, and we appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this discussion. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Very well done. We're going to have Lorne come up here, and I'm going to assist him with some activities. He's going to further explain the challenges that lay ahead of an operator, right?
Yes, sir. Good morning, everybody. My name's Lorne Prescott. I'm with Laramie Energy. Unfortunately, Wayne Bankert couldn't be here today, and so I'm going to stand in for him, and I'll do my best to keep it coherent and not so herky-jerky.
Which direction do you want me to go?
You're going to go that way. So, in an effort, it's already been stated that the process is relatively complicated and big. And in an effort to reinforce that, this is a representation off the COGCC website. It's upside down, so you can't understand it. Some people might say that often the COGCC stuff's upside down. So anyway, this is a representation of the decision tree that's associated with reclamation for the COGCC. It's extremely helpful, but as you can see, it is pretty big. So,
Margaret did allude it's complex.
yeah. So you can interpret this any way you want. Okay, so there's that. Thank you. So again, I'm with Laramie Energy, and as some of you know, we recently benefited from acquiring the Oxy assets, Garfield County area. One of the things that Laramie has that's unique and highly specific is that we have areas that are that benefit from significant diversity in terms of wildlife and wildlife populations that are existing on the location. So we have to be cognizant of reclamation, and also we have to be extremely careful in terms of maintaining our assets. And in acquiring the Oxy stuff, it's certainly the same thing. It's a different, right now, the majority of our holdings were in the Plateau Valley, and then so we took over the stuff that's basically here in Garfield County, and the environment's slightly different, the ecosystems are slightly different, but the same responsibilities there. There's significant populations of wildlife in both locations that require us to be cognizant of reclamation. So I'm going to try to go ahead and explain or relate some of the specific things that are associated with our experiences in terms of reclamation. I guess what it distills down to is that in the case, we own a significant amount of our properties. That is, Laramie is the surface owner, and we've gone to great lengths to develop surface use agreements with the landowners that anticipate the long-term use of the land. And so in that case, it may not always be practical to go ahead and reclaim to the exact same conditions as prior to the development. And what we also have is a number of experiences that are associated with that. I guess what finally it distills down to is that typically, at some point in the discussion about the ownership and the requirement for reclamation, we get to the point where it's somewhat ambiguous as to the actual jurisdiction of the COGCC on properties that are owned by the operators, and then to a lesser degree, the properties that with carefully crafted surface use agreements with the landowners as well. So, and that's in spite of the fact that I will commend the COGCC has done a fantastic job of providing guidance documents, and recently they've gone to great lengths to try to communicate how the interpretation of reclamation rules is being implemented. But I can guarantee you that invariably it will distill down to what's the extent of the jurisdiction here and what do I have to do. So this is the specific details associated with our land holdings. So we understand that the issues related to reconciling the COGCC criteria for reclamation against landowner preferences can change throughout the course of your operations. We typically don't have issues or conflicts with the criteria that are embedded within the COGCC rules, but here's what we end up with. Our bullet list is, we often, this is where the problems stem for us. Postponing interim or final reclamation as a result of changes in our long-term project planning, postponing interim or final reclamation to accommodate storage on pad, and attempting to go ahead and use roads that were constructed for a period that would be outside our original planning. In certain circumstances, adhering strictly to reclamation timing would result in multiple disturbances at the same location, and then increases the chance for wildlife disturbances. The requirement for repetitive interim reclamation tends to could degrade fragile soils and increase the risk of having naturally occurring microbial activity diminished. Making changes to the original topography during final reclamation in order to accommodate emergent issues. So it's not always practical for us to go ahead and bring it back to exactly the same topography, and I think we've heard a comment about that this morning from Sam. We also believe that the COGCC's current interpretation of reclamation rules may infringe on property rights regarding the use of well pads for storage of surface owner equipment. So, as Margaret indicated, there's a process in place, and in most cases, if not all, they're agreeable and helpful in putting it together. But I think what we've heard here a couple times this morning is that the process is big and, at a risk of using an inflammatory word, burdensome. So my idea, or the idea that we've come up with, would be to streamline the process, that instead of accommodating the COGCC's regulatory requirements with additional documentation, it's our belief that as part of the planning process for our development and the development of SUAs, that a lot of those things that are concerning reclamation are attended to as part of that process. And that what we could do, instead of having to go ahead and provide documentation, would be to have a field visit and let the COGCC folks see what exactly has taken place, where exactly it stands now, and where we anticipate it going for the long haul. Because a carefully crafted SUA and the appropriate amount of planning that's put into development will automatically have the details that are required for the reclamation. So that's pretty much it, and thank you very much for the opportunity to come up here. I appreciate it, and I know Wayne's sorry that he couldn't make it. So thank you all.
Thank you, Lorne. We're going to open it up for a few questions here. We have about 5 to 7 minutes for questions on this reclamation topic. So do we have anybody that would like to ask questions?
Anyone?
No one's had enough coffee yet this morning. So I know I haven't.
I just have a question.
Yes, one question over here from Mark.
Hold on just a second. I was just curious, as a former environmental professional, how much you rely on historic aerial photography to document conditions prior to the well pad being built and during and after, if that's any part of our anyone's documentation process, or could be.
Lorne or Mike, you want to?
I'm sorry. Typically we don't rely a lot on the historical visual aerial views, because we're required to go ahead and take an assessment in advance of any disturbances that we make. So we catalog the conditions by way of the requirements of the COGCC's 2A.
Yeah, no, I would agree with Lorne, but we do, you know, I will say though, we do have aerial imagery. We fly our leases, I think, every other year, and so we have that imagery available plus historic data, and you know, as Lorne indicated, we are required to assess background issues before disturbance, but certainly aerial imagery is another tool that we have in our toolbox.
I use Google Earth all the time to look at stuff. It's a wonderful tool.
So our reclamation specialist used aerial photography to review requests, you know, to see if something was pre-existing. You know, a ranch road was there before that doesn't need to be reclaimed. Looking at just sort of progress through the years. So we use them, but we use aerial photography a lot. Maybe not as much as the historical as the more recent stuff, to just see, you know, changes in progress.
Any other questions?
Have we figured out in the Piceance Basin how long these wells really are going to last? Is there some sense of when final reclamation will begin? Or has it begun on very many in this area? It seems to me like we're more in a perpetual state of interim reclamation.
No, that's a great question, and I think from my perspective, what I've seen, Mr. Jolly, is just it varies by location. You know, it depends on the well and, you know, the completion of that well, and you know, some wells, I mean, as you well know, their longevity, they may be marginal, but then we have others, and especially with the newer techniques where we're getting into the horizontal drilling, they could be producing for a long time to come. But I mean, to your point, bringing some of that inventory of the older locations into final reclamation. I'm hoping that we start seeing more and more of those as those wells start to taper off. I don't know if there's a good number. Yeah, I think it's just very site dependent. Sam.
Well, I would just say that there's been, I guess it's been serendipitous that some of these wells have lasted as long as they have and shown the long tail of production that they're demonstrating. So, but again, it's site specifics, I think, as Mike says.
Other questions?
Just a quick question. I guess this is sort of on the, not the direct topic, but reclamation monitoring. I know as of COGCC right now, your whole monitoring system is based on qualitative. So the 80% is based on qualitative, and that's so your inspector goes out, looks at the area, determines if the native species are comparable to what's there right now, but it's all on qualitative. And just wondering, I did a lot of mine reclamation, and that's all quantitative. And it seems to help the operators because there's no question at all. It's a very direct, straight number. This is your percent cover. It is passes or it doesn't. So I'm just wondering if COGCC is planning on going towards quantitative in the future, which I think would be beneficial for operators and for the state and for landowners.
We actually have gone to a quantitative assessment process. We have 6 people in our reclamation group right now, and they're all people with a background, education, work experience in reclamation, mine reclamation, well site reclamation, and they are doing, I'm not sure if it's a point intercept, but they are doing a quantitative assessment, especially on final reclamation, and they're looking at species that are there. They look at the seed mix. You can ask some of the oil and gas operators in here. They're pretty quantitative in their assessments. So yeah, and I think it is helpful. You can show success, you know, if something starts not progressing, it's a good information for the operators to have.
Time for one more question. How about a round of applause for our moderator and our speaker? We'll give the state one last shot.
Okay, so I'm in this room with a really smart group of people everywhere, problem solvers. So it sounds easy, but it's really not. I'm looking at a memo here written by the Attorney General back in 1996. And that was Attorney General Gail Norton. And the legislature in '94 had passed, revised the Oil and Gas Act that said we had to pass rules to be protective of public health, safety, welfare, and the environment. And they included reclamation of lands disturbed by oil and gas. So that's a law, that's a rule. We're the executive group, the executive branch. We're supposed to execute those. So when the reclamation rules were passed in '96, there was a surface owner waiver in there, but the Attorney General said that it was basically illegal because we couldn't have a rule that allowed our rules to not be enforced. So it was revised, and it came back out later in 1996. And there's a couple of different, opinions by the Attorney General, and it really is. It kind of restricts us on how streamlined and how easy this process can be. And so a lot of great questions were asked here. Jurisdiction, these, oil and gas operators that own big lands. But so, I mean, think about it. We can't just change our rules. You have to do rulemaking, and I'm not sure if anybody wants to do that. But I guess this is just maybe love to have feedback on how we can improve this, but we can still be in compliance with our mission to protect public health, safety, welfare, and the environment.
All right, with that, thank you, everyone.